I'd been a hunter for most of my life leading up to this incident. The smell of the warm air and the beauty of nature always had me at ease. I never felt scared alone at night in the woods because I had seen everything there is to be scared of. I've seen bears the size of small cars, animals so vicious that they'll kill anything that moves. The one thing I was never scared of was deer. I'd heard the tales of skinwalkers and wendigos and pretty much anything in between. My uncle was an expert on tracking and hunting. We always went on trips together and would always come back with a fresh kill. He did have a rule, though. I remember it so vividly because it was weird. He never wanted to go hunting in winter. I never asked why. I don't know, but something about it always had me on edge. One day during winter, I was about to go deer hunting when my uncle stopped me at the front door. When he came in, he saw my packed supplies and my rifle and knew I was about to go hunting. He immediately burst into a wrath of anger and dragged me to the wall to get into my face. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he said, spittle flying all over my face as he looked at me crazy. He looked primal, as if he was fearful of something that he didn't want to share. It's the same face you would expect a child to make if he was dumped in the middle of nowhere. The face of fear you see in people who have PTSD. I calmly brushed him off and got to the door saying I was going hunting. I was not about to fight with my uncle and ruin the trip, as I hadn't gone hunting for close to a month. When you hunt, you get adjusted to it, and when you go on break, you kind of miss it. As I got in my truck, my uncle peered at me out the window. He was there to take care of my house, but before I reversed, he left with the door open. My uncle's prone to outburst. As I should mention, he's only ever done it a few times, and it's always in a situation where the reaction suits it. Not this one, though. This one was bad, and I wondered what was so bad about hunting in the winter. The spot I'd planned was an isolated one. It was a very heavily forested area, which I hadn't been to before. I obviously had mapped the area out and brought essential survival tools in case the worst came, but I never thought I'd have to use it after all those years out in the woods. When I arrived, the crisp cold air immediately saturated me in discomfort. I quickly got another layer of clothes on before I started to walk to where I would set up camp for the night. The clearing I had chosen was a pretty tight one. There was a big tree in the center that stood tall above the rest. It was called the Forest Star, which suited it. Around the clearing, the forest was extremely dense. Almost no sun shone through the top. There was a small hunting tower north of the entrance of the clearing, so it was a direct walk from the camp. As I walked ahead, I noticed something. There were very small droplets of blood littering the ground. My first thought was that it must be from an injured animal or something, but the droplets were small and evenly placed. I shook the thought out of my head and made it to my setup as I started to pin my tent. When I was done, I checked my watch. It was about 5:30 p.m. I had about 2 hours for hunting before it was pitch black, so I made it to the tower. When I undid my rifle from the case, I heard scraping. Shaking it off, I took position and waited. As I stood there, time almost seemed to slow down. I was in a precise focus, was ready for anything. I wasn't ready for what I saw, though. Out came two bucks that seemed injured. There were small droplets of blood coming from their eyes. As I focused in, I saw that it wasn't dried blood either. It was fresh, and it was oozing from their eyes. I was shocked. I'd never seen anything like it. Multiple scenarios ran through my head. Had a hunter shot both of them in the eye and managed not to kill them? But each scenario seemed more unlikely than the last. I took aim at the closest one and shot it. It stood there for a second, just not moving. Then they trotted off as if nothing had happened. Blood was running from the wound, so I'd obviously hit it, but it didn't seem scared or fazed. I decided that was enough and sort of jogged to my site. I was freaking out and decided that I'd cook dinner and go to bed early. When I got back to camp, I pulled out a tin of beans, grabbed a pot, and started a fire so I could cook them. As I cracked open a beer, the familiar sound of a branch snapping sounded off next to me. I brushed it off as I sat back to relax, thinking it was probably a small deer. I was thinking about the deer as I started to chalk it up to the fact that I must not have hit deep, and the deer was in shock. When I finished eating, I went to bed. I was shivering in the night cold, and I could hear my body shaking uncontrollably. As I dozed off after a brutal 2 hours of cold, I heard another snap. This time, it was a lot louder, though, like a bear. I immediately grabbed my rifle and got out of the tent. My fire was burning low, and in the distance, I saw 2 red lights. I walked towards them when my mind started to race. Something felt wrong. As I closed the distance, my guts were literally twisted. My mind was anxious, and I felt like I was about to break down. Then I realized what was wrong. Those weren't lights. They were 2 big, beady, solid red eyes. There were no pupils. They were just orbs hovering. I stood frozen in realization. I thought it was a big cat, but what emerged was much worse. Its fur was black, darker than the night around us. Its antlers grew twisted and uneven, but the worst part was it was crying blood. Deep red droplets were pelting down its unnatural face. I couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in fear. Then it made a sound like a baby crying. It was horrible. The sound of unnatural wails filled the cold air, making it worse. My body felt crumpled, so I finally broke out into a sprint. When I looked back, it was still there. It wasn't even breathing, but the sound of that baby crying wasn't fading. It was like a speaker was attached to my ear. When I made it to the camp, I rushed to pack my stuff. In a hurry, I ran, leaving the tent behind, and rushed onto my truck. As I fumbled with the keys, I saw that something was walking slowly towards me. That's when the whispering started. Terrible, faint voices echoed throughout the forest as my mind started to close. I felt my cerebral melting as I sat there in a kind of sleep paralysis. I found the strength to finally open the door and get in my car. I slammed it shut, and that thing was right at the window. I started to sob as I jammed the key in the ignition. My mind felt fried, and I swerved out of there. I didn't care if I hit anything. I just wanted to be away from that thing. Before I could properly back out, it stood on its legs, and it repeated a voice I recognized. You do not escape this. The forests are mine. It was my grandpa's voice. He died when I was 6, and I never knew any of the details. The thing then made a howl, a terrible shrieking howl that hurt my entire body. As it did so, I heard scampering as more of those things came out. They had blood running from their eyes as well. The baby cries started again, and that's when I finally drove out of that place. When I raced home, I immediately barged into my door. My shoulder ached, but I didn't care. I shoved the door and locked it and ran into the kitchen. That's when I saw my uncle sitting at the table, enjoying a glass of scotch. So, you saw what I did, didn't you, Anthony? I couldn't form words. I was so shocked. My uncle came up to me and put a hand on my shoulder. What you saw out there is my rule I abide by. There are things in those forests in winter that are so horrible even the most seasoned can't handle it. I saw it when I was a boy, and since then I don't hunt during the winter. I finally mustered a sentence. What was it? He took a deep breath before sitting down. You saw something called the Urabarak. It's an ancient being that dwells in the forest during these winters. Hunters who see it usually are never the same again, but some never come back home. I was lucky. My uncle sort of sniffed as he told me about his encounter with the Urubarak. When I was 23, my father and I went out into the woods on a very cold winter to hunt. Our family was struggling, so we didn't have much food. When we were hunting, my dad called out to me, but before I could even get to him, I heard him yell out before he went silent. I never saw him again, but what stood there was worse than the loss of my own. A deer with red eyes, black fur, and twisted antlers stood there. Blood ran from its eyes. Then it started to cry like a baby. My uncle broke down and had to take a few seconds before continuing. I comforted him as I was teary-eyed too. It ran after me, Anthony, on two legs. It was like a human, and I rushed to get away from it. But I wasn't quick enough. He rolled up his sleeve and revealed a terrible red scar that ran across the entire underside of his arm. It was trying to feast on me. It knew I feared it, but eventually I managed to lose it. He finally finished his scotch before continuing. I was stuck in those woods for 3 days, fighting to survive. I heard its cries and whispers all around as I tried to make it out. I finally arrived at the road and was taken in by police. No trace was ever found of my dad, except for one thing. They found blood at the scene and tested it. It was my father's. What was strange about it is it was mixed with his tears. My uncle finally stood up. Fear it, for it knows who you are. Those were his last words. He left my house, and the police found him wrapped up in a noose 2 days later. It broke me. My hunting buddy and best friend was gone. There was one detail about his suicide that was never resolved. He had droplets of blood coming from his eyes. The coroner inspected it and said it had been an aneurysm, but I'm not so sure that's the truth. I'm 50 now, and I haven't been hunting in 2 decades. I can't even go into the forest anymore. I'm thinking about going back and seeing what Urubarak is. Maybe I can kill him. Beware the Urubarak, for he lurks in the cold. My name is unimportant, but what I do is. I'm a member of an elite unit you'll never hear of. We contain incidences of all kinds. Not only do we deal with physical issues, but we also keep the information from the public. It's better that way. It keeps people from panicking and helps maintain order. I found a notebook on my last mission. Even though it violates the rules, I owe it to the author to tell his story. I know it'll be written off as a conspiracy theory or some crackpot Reddit post, so there's no real danger. At least, I don't think there is. It reads as follows. Here I sit in this moldy, godforsaken cell, awaiting my unfair death sentence to be carried out. I can't stand my neighbors. They're noisy and they stink. It's my own fault, though. If I hadn't been responsible and tried to help, I wouldn't be here right now. Ironically, doing the right thing has doomed me. It all started a long time ago, in a golden age that I like to call last week. Good morning, Miss Watner. You're looking as lovely as ever. For someone who looks so old that even a mummy would turn tail and run. Why, Jonathan, aren't you sweet? Thank you, ma'am. Will that be paper or plastic? Paper, of course. We can always grow more trees, can't we? Yes, ma'am. Maybe one day soon we'll use one to make you a nice coffin. The old crone drifted away, flashing her huge diamond ring and mink coat. I never understood why she bothered to come to the grocery store, when she could always have her servants do it for her. Then it hit me. This was her way of staying in touch with the commoners, of proving to herself that she was still human. I can't blame her too much, I guess. If I was obscenely rich, I'd want to flaunt it too. Uh-oh, looks like Mr. Burgess is heading towards Jane's register. I'd better go help. Jane, you have an urgent phone call in the office. I'll cover for you. A wave of relief washes over her, as panic had started to flood her face. Thank you, she whispered, touching my shoulder and sending warmth through me. "Humph," Mr. Burgess mumbled, leering at her as she went. "Take away the only good part of my day." "Good morning, Mr. Burgess. Are you having a party?" I asked, as a dozen cans of Sterno rolled down the belt, followed by 10 boxes of matches and 5 cases of bottled water. "Never mind what I'm doing," he growled. Oof. I struggled to stay upright from the stench of alcohol that wafted from his mouth. "Yes, sir. That'll be $157.32, please." He grumbled something that I couldn't make out as his gnarled fingers reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 brand new $100 bills. I handed him back his change. "You have a nice day now." He shot me a look of scorn mixed with pity, a look I would have expected to see a hunter give to wounded prey. "Humph," was all he said as he scuttled out through the door. As I watched him go with the same look of scorn and pity, a man stumbled in. He wasn't remarkable in any way, but something told me to keep an eye on him. He was of average height and size, but he shuffled instead of walked. The look in his eyes was vacant, as if the lights were on, but no one was home. He shuffled past me just as Jane returned to her register. She shot me a look of gratitude with just a hint of affection, but I was too focused to acknowledge it. As if mesmerized, I drifted behind him, trying to remain inconspicuous as he slowly made his way to the pharmacy section. I turned the corner and there he stood, swaying back and forth as though driven by a non-existent breeze. I approached him. "Can I help you, sir?" As he turned towards me, I could see scratches on his neck and a hint of dried blood under his jacket. He stared at me with those empty eyes. Instinctually, my hand slipped behind my back and grasped the handle of my knife, something I carried for just such an occasion. I set my feet and prepared for him to lunge at me. This is it, I thought. 12 years of working at this menial job have finally paid off. I'm in the right place at the right time to stop the outbreak. I just need to be sure, or I'll spend the next 20 somewhere much worse. I pulled the knife out just an inch when he cleared his throat. "Sorry, it's my wife. She isn't feeling well." I slid the knife back into my sheath and said, "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can help you find?" His vacant eyes drifted back to the shelf. He picked up a bottle of Midol and a pack of tampons. "These should do it." He tried to force a smile and shuffled past me towards the checkout. Something was still nagging at me about him. I went back to my register and bagged groceries while he waited in line. When he shuffled towards the front door, I mumbled something about needing carts and followed him outside. He had parked his car at the edge of the lot, but even partway there, I could see the car he was heading for was rocking back and forth and sounded like someone was pounding from inside. As I approached, I saw blood smeared all over the window and the face of a large woman pressed against the glass. I was 30 feet away when he reached the car and unlocked the door. "Don't!" I screamed, reaching for the knife, but he'd already pulled the door handle. She exploded out of the car and launched herself at him. He fell backwards and she began devouring him like a starving lion on its prey. She clawed at him and ripped out his throat with her teeth, making a geyser of blood. He tried to cry out, but all that came out was a bloody gurgle. I shook off the shock of the pure, stark reality of the situation and took advantage of my opening. I held my knife over my head, closed my eyes, and swung as hard as I could. I missed the first try and only managed to slice off her ear. Needless to say, that got her attention. She ceased gouging at him and turned towards me. Crap! I tried to ready myself in a defensive stance, but she lunged at me, growling. I held the knife in front of me and she impaled herself on it. Unfortunately, it sunk into her neck. The force of her impact knocked me onto my back. I nearly lost consciousness when my head bounced off the pavement. My vision swam as she snapped her bloody teeth at me. I held her at bay with the knife that was still lodged in her throat, the same knife I would need to kill her. After a quick moment's thought and a frantic plan, I shoved my forearm into her chest and yanked the knife free. I lost ground in the process and felt her teeth scrape my nose as I swung the knife around and buried it in her ear. It looked like a movie in pause. She stopped with her mouth frozen open, then slowly rolled off of me. I sat up as best I could, stared down at her, pulling my knife out, and then I shoved it in his ear, just to be sure. "Freeze!" came a loud voice from behind me. I turned to see 3 police cars with their lights flashing. 6 officers, all pointing their guns at me, Drop the knife, get on your knees, lace your fingers behind your head, the officer said. Are you kidding me? I just saved everyone, I said incredulously. Do it now or we will shoot you. The knife clattered to the ground as I did as I was told. In a heartbeat, I was cuffed and stuffed, riding towards the station in the back of the police car. Third-degree murder? Are you nuts? I yelled at the attorney, seated across the table from me. That's the best I can do. You brutally murdered 2 people in broad daylight in front of a dozen witnesses. They weren't people anymore. Let me guess, you thought they were? Yes, I did, and they were. He threw his papers into his briefcase and started towards the door. I'll register an insanity plea if you want me to. I'm not insane. You have to listen to me. We can stop it. Find out who those people were and where they were coming from. The police in that town need to be alerted. He rolled his eyes. I already know who they were and where they were from. Michael and Sara Weston. They lived right here in Frost Creek. They both worked at the hospital. She was a nurse and he worked in maintenance. I slumped in my chair. It's over. There's no way I can stop it if it started in town. The guards took me back to my cell, where I sat in quiet desperation, trying to decide what to do next. I took the tablet and the pencil I'd been given when I was booked and started writing this as a bit of a history. Right now, it's just so I can keep the events straight in my own head. I'm calling it Dear John, a letter to the undead. By the time I'm done writing this, there won't be anyone left alive to read it. It only started yesterday, back when my life was uncomplicated and boring. When I was done writing, my wrist hurt. Logging down the demise of humanity will do that. I tried to warn the officers when they would pass my cell at mealtime. It became a litany. Is there anything strange going on in town? Do you have enough food, water, and ammo at home? Is your family someplace where you can protect them? My concern was met with scorn and even alarm. I guess they felt threatened by my questions. I don't know why. After a while, the officers came through less and less. That was when it happened. My cell window looked out towards a truck stop. I was lying on my bunk when I felt as much as heard the explosion. I jumped up and stared in shock as the tanker truck was up in flames, sending black smoke pouring into the air. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and still no fire trucks had arrived. With little wind, the smoke had settled at street level, making visibility near zero. An hour later, the wind picked up and blew away the haze just enough to see the sun riding low on the horizon. That's when I saw them. They were shambling through the haze, unfocused with no direction. They just came. I watched with a helpless detachment, knowing that there was nothing I could do about it. I heard the first gunshot a few minutes later. They shambled into the cell block, 2 and 3 at a time. It didn't take long for the smell of rotting flesh to surround my cell, reaching through the bars like groupies at a rock concert. Thank God there was a wall behind me. I watched in hopeless fascination as the inmates in the cell next to me got too close to the bars and were torn apart. So here I sit, the putrid scent of death and decay overwhelming me, but no more than the knowledge that I could have stopped this, or at least warned people if I hadn't been arrested. The least I can do is write this letter to whoever might be left alive to read it. So maybe they know how this whole thing began, and it might help them in some small way. Day 2. I can honestly say that this is the first time I've ever entertained the thought of drinking out of the toilet. Thirst is driving me mad, though, and the sink is unfortunately located next to the bars. My guests have not gotten bored and moved on like I thought they would. If anything, they seem to have doubled in numbers. On the plus side, all the growling and jostling kept me awake so that I wouldn't have to worry about being grabbed in my sleep. No, I can be sure I'll be awake and alert so that I feel every set of teeth as I'm slowly devoured. It's always good to think positively. One of the deputies has made his way to the front of the cell. The keys to the cell dangle tantalizingly from his belt. I'm hypnotized by them. I could go insane just thinking about the possibilities. But the fact of the matter is, I know I'd be dead before I shoved the key in the lock. It does make me smile, though, knowing that the Walking Dead are too brainless to realize that they literally hold the keys to my demise. Day 3. I did it. I'm not proud of it, but the overwhelming thirst drove me to it. Unfortunately, there's not much left in the bowl. I flushed to see if the water level would rise again, but it didn't. I've kept the bowl clear of contamination, though. I have taken some small measure of revenge against my future killers by relieving myself in their open mouths. I've become a fairly accurate shot, too. I stand just out of reach and then fire away. They do draw back from it, but I don't really know why. I'm sure it doesn't even register in their dead brains. It's still strange, though. The ones that I hit don't return. Day 4. I can't stand the relentless, overwhelming, crushing thought that I'm powerless, that at some point I'll succumb. I'm gonna try to grab the keys. I don't know what I'll do from there, but it's clear that help isn't coming. If I want to survive, I'll have to do it on my own. Day 5. This will be my last entry. I can't believe what a fool I was. Even though I was able to grab the keys, I paid for it dearly. 2 of them got a hold of my arm and bit right through it. I wrenched away with all my strength, screaming in sheer agony as my injured arm ripped away from my body, leaving them with a snack and me with a bloody stump. I'm bleeding as I write this. I haven't even tried to stop it. I'd rather die this way than be ripped to pieces by those creatures. At least it's on my terms, not theirs. If someone finds this, I hope that something in these pages will be of some help. I only wish it could be more. Maybe by keeping these creatures distracted here, someone else is having a fighting chance to escape. I hope so. Goodbye. I destroyed the notebook. Standard procedure. Contain the threat, contain the information. That's what we do. It was a big deal locally, but we were able to keep it out of the national news. We told the public there was a toxic gas leak that made people sick, but that it was being contained. The explosion at the gas station was covered as a random accident. It did help us with cleanup, though. Nothing like a giant fire to throw all the undead bodies on. I salute the unfortunate soul for his brave sacrifice. I just wish we'd been called in sooner. We might have been able to save him. I know what you must be thinking. What a horrible person. I know. I've thought it too. The fact I'm genuinely thinking about sending away my dog makes me feel pretty guilty. Then I remember what he's been doing, and my guilt is replaced with fear. This started about a month ago. I came home early from work one day, absolutely furious, and clutching a parting gift from my boss. My Christmas bonus was a ham or something. I sighed with a hand pressed firmly against my throbbing temple and placed the mystery meat in the fridge. The pounding behind my eyes got more and more intense until I leveled my fist and punched the fridge. The throbbing in my head didn't go away, but there was a new guest, as it was now accompanied by the pain in my knuckles. I let out a deep sigh that was childish. It was at that moment that Rufus came padding in, his big brown eyes gazing up at me, as if wondering what that noise had been. "Your dad was pretty dumb just now," I said, crouching down to run my hands across his thick fur. He wagged his tail and let out an excited noise as I petted him. I raised my eyebrows. I wish I could just curl up in a ball and chill like you do. Rufus, of course, paid no mind to this, and after realizing he wouldn't be receiving more pets, padded away back to his comfortable bed. I rolled my eyes and took a deep breath. While disappointing, this whole Christmas bonus thing wasn't the end of the world. Sure, my boss was an evil prick, but I had a whole 2 weeks of paid vacation stored up, and he couldn't stop me from using it. So, screw him. I'm gonna relax and spend my vacation doing whatever I want. How about it, Rufus? Wanna do nothing? I asked loudly. Rufus simply yawned. It was the next morning that I discovered that the mystery meat was still in my fridge. I peeled back the wrapped paper to see a red mass bundled in saran wrap. I furrowed my brow. Gotta be beef. Rufus sat at my side, eagerly waiting. I'm not a butcher. How would I know what it is? I'll just fry it? Everything tastes good fried with onions. I leaned down and booped Rufus's snoot. I bet you would taste good fried with onions, too. He agreed as his tail wagged back and forth. Well, don't you have a high opinion of yourself? I cut off a large chunk of the mystery meat and threw it in a pan with onions, salt, pepper, and butter. I hope you taste good, Christmas bonus, because you don't really look that great. I probably talked to myself too much. Having a full conversation probably isn't healthy. I raised my eyebrow and decided to turn on the TV for my own sanity. It blinked on to a cooking channel. I glared at the TV. Don't you shame me. Then I flipped to the news and got right back to frying the beef. Thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and families of the late... I looked down at the large mass of beef left over. Hey, Rufus, I picked up a raw slab. Want something to chew on? He dashed on over like any dog would when presented with a hunk of meat. All right, you want it? Sit, I commanded with my most authoritative voice. Rufus gave no care, lunging upward and snagging it from my hand. Hey, I said, laughing. That was rude. Rufus took one last look at me before tearing into the beef with vigor. Still chuckling to myself, I once again turned back to the news. The search is still on for Maya Kelling, a local who was reported missing on December 14th by her boyfriend. She was in the Beluva area, and anyone with information is encouraged to call this number. I shut it off. The news is so depressing. Rufus paid me no mind, as he continued munching away with that playful ferocity of a domesticated animal. I took a deep breath and went to have a smell of the beef. It smelled god-awful. Jesus, what did I do to this thing? There was something deeply off-putting about that smell. It didn't smell rotten or decayed. It smelled foreign. It filled me with apprehension and a strange sense of dread. I shook my head and felt a wave of stupidity roll over me. The feeling was not too dissimilar when you were watching a scary YouTube video at night by yourself and you want to turn the lights on. I felt like a little bitch, but the feeling of nervousness and the fact that no one but me would judge me for throwing all this meat out made my decision easy. This was going straight into the garbage. I threw it in and did my utmost to forget about it. Take out it is. Having stuffed myself with pizza, I crashed hard. I'm a heavy sleeper, so it takes a lot to wake me up. Yet, I was woken up. A loud crash echoed through my bedroom as I shot bolt upright and listened for a moment. I heard dragging noises. My heart pounded in my chest. I stood, having armed myself with my pistol. I took a couple of careful steps forward. The noise became more distinguished. There was a gnawing and an eager snort. A sense of dread filled me as I rounded the corner, expecting the worst. "Rufus!" I shouted, seeing an absolutely devastating mess. He had torn open the trash, and it was scattered everywhere. I groaned and slumped my shoulders. "Not only did you scare the crap out of me, I'm also gonna have to clean up your friggin' mess. Come on, man." Rufus had pillaged what he was looking for and scampered off without even looking at me. Having fully cleaned up the mess, I stood up and stretched, cracking my back in a few places. "You're an ass for that," I said as I washed my hands. "I'm going back to bed. Good night. Love you," I trailed off. Rufus was sitting on his bed, gnawing on something. "Hey, what do you have there?" I walked forward and reached down. To my great surprise, it was the first time I was greeted by a low growl. "Hey now," I said, my words barely making it out of my throat because of the immediate surprise and fear. I took a few steps back and knelt down to get a good view of what he was gnawing on. The mystery meat. I reached forward tentatively and got met with the same low growl as before. "Rufus, come on, give me that. I think it's bad." But what Rufus did next sent a chill down my spine. He simply stopped gnawing on it and stared me dead in my eyes. No more movement, no tail wagging, nothing. I must have sat there for 30 seconds before I did anything. I stood up, forcing myself to turn around despite every single fiber of my being telling me not to take my eyes off of him. Fine. Have it your way." I couldn't help but take a peek over my shoulder as I walked away. He sat motionless, his eyes still locked onto mine. I turned on my light and closed my door, lying in bed until my eyes got too heavy to keep open. After waking up, it took a few seconds to recollect the night before. When I did, I fully opened my door to reveal Rufus curled up in a ball. He was curled up in his dog bed, fast asleep. I felt the weary tension within me wither away. "I need to get out of the house," I muttered. I came home that night to a dark abode. Having been drinking, my bearings were slightly askew, and I found myself fumbling with my keys a bit. As I pushed open the door to my house, I was greeted by an unfriendly darkness that settled itself over an empty house. I pawed for the light switch for a moment, until I found it, flipping it on with my one hand. "Crap!" I cried in fear, as my gaze was met by a great black mass standing in the middle of the living room. It wobbled slightly, as if unsure of its footing, before it fell to all fours. "Rufus?" I cried, my heart playing in my ribcage like a bongo. What the hell were you doing, you creepy-ass mutt?" Rufus just stared, tail stationary, eyes fixated on me. I'm gonna go relax." "Cut that out." Rufus didn't blink. Neither did I. I slammed my door closed and sat on the edge of my bed, taken aback. Jesus, that was friggin' scary. As I took off my shoes, the image of the shadows in the dark, form stretched in a way it wasn't supposed to, made my skin crawl. I've seen dogs standing up before, but in that goofy cute way. Hell, I've even seen dogs do a headstand. But this, standing in the middle of the room in the dark, just staring at the door, it unsettled me to my core. My sleep was troubled, as if I had a nightmare I couldn't quite remember. I woke up to that feeling of unease creeping its way back up my spine. To stall, I scrolled through the news, but nothing could take my mind off of it. Not Bitcoin plunging in value, not the disappearance of that local girl, not Taco Bell bringing back the nacho fries. I just kept imagining what Rufus must be doing at any given moment. Standing there. Just standing there. I growled and punched my pillow. I'm acting like a wuss. Gotta get up. I rolled out of bed and crept to my door, heart pounding. I stared at the handle and reached my hand out slowly, my heart beginning to thump against my chest at an increased tempo, with a deep breath that caught in my chest as I eased the door open. I felt fear jolt through my body as I saw him, standing once again in the middle of the living room, his furry back to me, as he stood absolutely motionless, staring at the wall. My words caught in my throat before I could speak. I did the worst possible thing I could have possibly done, and quietly closed the bedroom door. The fear began to set in worse. I locked my door and collapsed on my bed, breathing fast. He was out there, standing upright. I couldn't open that door again. I couldn't make it out of the house. Not with him there. Not with him just standing there. I found myself nauseous with terror that had possessed my body. I sat there staring at the door for the better part of an hour, before finally getting up the courage to once again check outside. I crept closer, each footfall on the soft carpet surely giving me away to the keen ears of Rufus. My heart pounded in near apoplectic terror as I once again laid my hands on the knob. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to open the door. Once it did, I peered through the crack to try and see where he might be. Still standing. Trying my best to summon fury, I opened the door wide and shouted, "Rufus!" All the anger I summoned was turned into terror vapors when Rufus slowly turned his head to face me. He turned his body next. He took a step. He took another one. And another. I screamed in horror as he began marching towards me, off kilter, one step at a time. I once more slammed the door and locked it, stumbling backwards in panic. I didn't hear a sound at my door, but I saw the shadow of something standing there. Rufus, stop it right now! It was met with silence again. I was met with a terrible sound. It sounded like when a dog yawns and their voice stretches and bends. But this had purpose. This wasn't just a noise. It was measured, meaningful. Get out of my house! I screamed in terror as it continued. Get out now! The sound stopped. The shadow at my door was slowly and clumsily plodding away. I shook, my breath coming in gasps. I stayed awake in my room for the rest of the day, until finally thirst gripped me and I couldn't bear it any longer. I left the room, armed with the small pistol I keep for safety. There he was, curled up in his dog bed, fast asleep. I kept my eyes locked on him as I tiptoed around, gathering food and water before dashing to my room. I type this now to you, asking the community of people who deal with these things. If I call the cops, they'll call animal control. They'll either laugh in my face or simply take Rufus. I don't want that. I want my Rufus back, my good boy. What's happening to him? Why is he like this? I'm shaking as I write this. I've thought about calling the police, but I haven't figured out if I'm losing my mind or if my entire family has lost theirs. Maybe I'll wake up soon and this will all be a terrible nightmare. For context, I'm an only child and the only grandchild of my last living grandmother. A couple of weeks ago, while I was at work, I received a phone call from my mom informing me that my grandmother had fallen in her kitchen. Mom said that my Uncle Lou was with her and already in the ambulance. Paramedics suspected she had a fractured hip and somehow had sliced open her foot. She was sedated due to the pain, but was otherwise responsive and fine. I immediately asked if I should meet them at the hospital, but Mom said, No, don't leave work. We'll update you once we know more. So, I waited. I love my grandma, but she's probably the most stubborn woman I've ever met. She has a home remedy for just about anything, and loathed seeing a doctor. So I was sure that she wouldn't be fun to deal with from the confines of a hospital bed. It doesn't help that Grandma absolutely refuses to use a walker or a cane, despite her debilitating age, and won't leave the house to live in a nursing home. 6 months ago, Uncle Lou moved in with her to help out. Not that he said it out loud, but I've always suspected he did it more for free rent, though. With nothing else to do, I sat at work, distracted, and waiting for a phone call from Mom with news. The call didn't come through until long after I'd gotten home and was brushing my teeth for bed. Apparently, Grandma was awake now and doing fine. She would need surgery for the broken hip, but they were able to get the laceration on her foot stitched up and bandaged. I asked to speak to her, so Mom held the phone up to Grandma's ear, and I told her that I loved her and I'd come see her once she was discharged. The hospital only allowed 2 visitors, and Mom and Uncle Lou refused to leave her side. "Hi, honey," Grandma said through the receiver. "I'm okay, but they won't let me leave." My mom's voice in the background exasperatedly explained that she needed surgery. "So they tell me. I'm fine, Anna. Come see me when I get home and we can play cards." I smiled, promising to visit, and said goodbye. She was discharged the following week and sent home. The hip replacement was successful, but she developed a nasty infection on her foot. Between the 2 ailments, Grandma was confined to her bed. Once she was comfortable at home, Mom gave me the okay to come over, so I made some chicken and dumpling soup and sat in a chair beside her bed while Mom spoon-fed Grandma. "There you go, Mom," my mom encouraged as Grandma sipped the broth off the spoon. I could tell that Grandma was wildly out of it. I had been expecting an earful about having to use a bedpan due to the cocktail of narcotics and antibiotics, but she merely grumbled in annoyance at Mom and Lou's constant hovering. For what it was, she seemed in good spirits, if not exceptionally tired. After about 2 hours of small talk and a soup mishap, I got up to leave. Mom saw me to the door. "She'll be fine, Anna. Lou and I are taking care of everything. Don't worry." I left feeling optimistic that my grandma would be back to her old Spitfire self relatively soon. But that visit with the soup was over 2 weeks ago now. Not long after, Mom took a leave of absence from work and holed up in Grandma's house with Uncle Lou. Each time I called, Mom gave a new excuse as to why I shouldn't visit. Risk of infection, flu season, fatigue, bowel issues, you name it. At first, I accepted these excuses at face value. They seem legit, but I can't even get Mom to put Grandma on the phone anymore. I made more soup yesterday and dropped it off, but Uncle Lou met me at the door and said it wasn't a good time, but he'd make sure she got it. "And we always let her know when you come to call," he assured. I noticed that there was an intense floral and antiseptic smell coming from the doorway. "Your mom won't stop cleaning," he explained. Frustrated, I called and complained to my father on my way home, but he defended Mom like always. "She's always been like that. They're extremely close, your mom and your grandma. And Lou, well, this just seems like classic Lou. You know, this is the first time they've really had to face the reality of their mother's age. They're just protective and scared to lose her." I figured he was right and hung up the phone feeling a little less unsettled. On Grandma's 89th birthday, however, I decided I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I would go over there and give her the present I had purchased for her, a new thriller by her favorite author. I arrived at the house in late afternoon and noticed all the blinds were closed. Being that it was a warm spring day, it was common for Grandma to have all the windows and drapes open, letting in both the sunlight and the fresh air. I knocked twice on the front door, but no one came. I knocked again with no answer. I tried the door, but it was locked. I paused for a moment, considering that maybe no one was home. Maybe Grandma had a follow-up with her surgeon. But both cars were in the driveway, so I knocked again, louder this time. The door opened a crack, and a foul odor filtered out, nearly choking me. "Mom?" I exclaimed, when her face appeared on the other side of the door. "What's that smell?" Seeing it was only me, she opened the door another inch. The infection's gotten worse, but we're monitoring it." "Should I call an ambulance?" I asked in a panic, pulling my cell phone out. No, Ann," she quickly reassured me. We have it handled. I stopped by and picked up refills on her antibiotics earlier, and we've been on the phone with her surgeon." Relieved, I took a deep breath, but the smell was so overpowering. "Mom, that smells ungodly. Why don't you open the windows?" We tried, but she's got so cold." Mom shrugged and didn't move. "Can I come in?" I asked, attempting to look over her shoulder into the dim house. I really didn't want to go inside due to the smell, but if Grandma wasn't doing well, I wanted to see her. "I don't think it's a good idea." "Where's Uncle Lou?" "Upstairs in his room." Her voice was reassuring, but the smell turned me aside. Surely a smell like that could only mean bad things. I pushed the door open and Mom protested. Just come back another day when she's feeling better. I promise you that Lou and I have this under control." In the kitchen, the odor was strong, but mixed with the smell of bleach. I couldn't tell if that made it better or worse. "At least let me see her and give her birthday present." Mom looked down to see the wrapped gift in her hand. "Of course," she said. "Gosh, I'm sorry. I've been so preoccupied. I'm sure she'll love it." At that moment, Uncle Lou came trotting down the stairs and smiled at me. "Anna, Mom will be so happy you're here." I looked at my mother incredulously. She was staring at her feet. What was going on? Uncle Lou continued down the hall, and I could hear him as he opened the door to Grandma's bedroom. "Mom, you have a visitor for your birthday." The smell of the house was searing my nostrils, but I wasn't going to let Grandma know I was repulsed by it. Mom led me down the hall to Grandma's bedroom, instructing me along the way to put on a brave face. I plastered on a smile as I turned the corner into the room. Grandma was sitting up in bed, and Uncle Lou had taken a seat on the mattress beside her. His body obscured most of the view, but I could see her feet were stuck out from under the quilt. The toes on her right foot were black with crumbling toenails and festering sores. The sheets under her heels were stained yellow from dried pus. Lou was prattling on to her, but Grandma wasn't responding. "Isn't it nice for Anna to come and see you on your birthday, Mom? Goodness knows you've been through a lot this month. She got you a present." He turned expectantly to me, his profile just enough to reveal Grandma's form where she sat up against the pillows. I'll try to explain the horror I witnessed, but I know that words will never do it justice. My stomach flipped and I froze. Grandma's dull, lifeless eyes stared straight ahead at the wall, unblinking and glazed over. Her eyelids were crusty and her jaw hung widely agape with sagging lips, revealing a gray fuzz that had begun to coat her tongue. Uncle Lou patted her leg while Mom hastily pulled the quilt back up over her feet. I barely heard as Lou exclaimed how cold she'd been from the infection. He picked up a tissue from the box on the nightstand and began dabbing at the corners of her mouth. "She doesn't talk much due to heavy sedation," he explained. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the pallid gray skin on Grandma's face and how it was starting to sag in ways that had nothing to do with her age. Flies buzzed overhead, and Mom picked up the fly swatter and began swatting them away. "Goddamn flies," she mumbled. "They won't leave her alone." One of the flies circled Grandma's face and landed in her open maw. Uncle Lou merely shooed it away. "She's been sleeping sitting up like this for the past week or so," Mom explained, patting Grandma's now covered feet. "The pain is just too much for her to lay down. We tried, but her muscles spasm and she can't move." My knees were shaking and I could all but back out of the room, reaching for and pressing myself against the opposite wall. Vomit crept up the back of my throat. "It's okay, Anna," Uncle Lou said from inside the room. "I know it's hard to see her in such a state, but that's why your mom and I are taking care of her. We agreed we wouldn't let her go back to the hospital. They've already messed up so much of her care. You saw her foot and what the doctors did to it." "How a hospital could let gangrene go unnoticed is beyond me," Mom agreed. "We've been sponge bathing her regularly, airing her feet and changing her bandages. It seemed to be helping, right, Mom?" she asked, squeezing Grandma's ankle. I tried to put my head between my knees, but the smell was so overpowering. Mom stepped out in the hallway and touched my shoulder. "Oh, Anna, I'm sorry. This is why I didn't want you to come over. The gangrene smell is hard to tolerate. I didn't want you to have to see her like this." Not knowing what else to do, I pulled her into the kitchen and said in the most steady voice I could manage, "Mom, why didn't you tell me that Grandma had passed?" Mom's face didn't change. She just looked at me. "What are you talking about, Ann? She's right there. You saw her." "Yeah, I did see her," I agreed, pointing at the bedroom door where the smell was so strong I had nearly passed out. "But Grandma is dead, Mom. You know that, right? She has very obviously passed away." Mom's eyebrows narrowed and she pursed her lips. "Listen, Ann, I get that it's hard for you. Hell, it's hard for all of us, but if you're saying this just to hurt me, it's not going to work. Stop being a brat. Your father is on his way over with a birthday cake." The room began to spin, and I needed to get out of that house immediately. I tossed the present on the kitchen table and grabbed my bag, fleeing out of the kitchen door and into the car where I took a deep breath of fresh air. I could see Mom at the large bay window looking out at me. She looked angry and upset, but I quickly turned and walked away. I pounded the steering wheel, yelling obscenities. Other than an open casket funeral, I had never seen a dead body before, let alone one that had so clearly been dead for weeks. But Grandma was undoubtedly dead, and my mother and uncle were staying in that house with her corpse. washing it and feeding it and talking to it like nothing had changed. I threw open the car door and vomited all over Grandma's neglected shrubs. By the time the dry heaves kicked in, Dad's car pulled up in the driveway. "Hey, sweetheart," he said as he opened the car door, seeing me kneeling in the grass. "Are you all right? Your mom called and told me you were quite upset." "Dad, she's dead," I choked out at the house. "Who's dead?" he asked, his voice worried. "Grandma. Grandma's dead. Mom and Lou, they're just sitting in there with her body." "Anna, calm down. Your mom mentioned you were hysterical and talking nonsense." "Talking nonsense? What are you saying?" I choked out. "Go look, Dad. I swear you'll see. She's dead, and Mom and Lou have lost their minds." "All right," he said, holding up his arms in surrender. "Let me grab the cake, and I'll go inside and see what's going on. Just stay here, okay?" I collapsed back in the front seat of my car, blasting the AC in an attempt to flush the smell of rotten flesh out of my nose. It felt like an hour before the front door opened again, and Dad calmly walked over to the driver's side window. "Hi, Anna Bear," he said cautiously. "Did you see her, Dad? You saw her, right?" "Shh, Anna," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Calm down. Yes, I saw her, and she's very sick, but otherwise alive. Your mom and Lou are taking good care of her." "What?" I clearly screamed. "Come inside," Dad said, going for the door handle. I quickly locked the door. Dad threw up his hands in frustration. "Just come inside, Anna. Uncle Lou is getting Grandma into her wheelchair, and we're all going to have some cake." He glanced up at the front window of the house. "Ah, see? There she is." I glanced up to see my grandmother's face at the window, her dead eyes looking blankly out the front yard. Rigor mortis had made it so her body couldn't sit in the wheelchair just right. Even from a distance and through a pane of glass, I could see death in her eyes and the shocking gape of her mouth. Her face looked even more twisted now, as if she'd taken her last breath in a tremendous amount of pain. But what made me scream in abject terror was that her cloudy pupils seemed to turn ever so slightly towards me. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the driveway, ignoring the shouts of my father and Uncle Lou as he burst out the front door. I didn't dare go home, where I was sure my father would follow. Were they right? Was she actually alive? It's not like I checked for a pulse or air in her lungs before I took off. I didn't touch her at all. Could it be me then? Was I the one having a nervous breakdown? I don't know what to do now. I'm absolutely terrified. Worst of all, when I close my eyes, all I see is my grandmother's rotting face. "I need you to start at the beginning, Marcus." The way he spoke shook me to my core. Everything about him, from his slick-pressed gray suit to his black-top fedora, I could tell he had no background in special operations. I could also tell he was somebody you didn't want to upset, so I did as I was told. The mission towered before us like a shadow in the night, a recon of what we believed to be a terrorist organization's base, nestled deep inside the dense woods of the Appalachian Mountains. We were briefed thoroughly, equipped meticulously, and trained extensively. But, as we approached the seemingly abandoned compound, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air, like a premonition of impending doom. I led a reconnaissance unit, my voice steady as I issued orders over the radio. "Stay sharp, everyone. Eyes peeled for any signs of activity. We do not know what we're walking into." The crackling of radio static filled the tense silence as my team spread out, cautiously advancing through the overgrown foliage surrounding the perimeter. Private Ryan Hayes, the youngest member of the team, kept glancing nervously at the dense forest that seemed to swallow the feeble light of the moon. "Sir, I've got movement to the east," Corporal Lisa Alvarez reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "Possible hostile activity," I nodded grimly. "Stay hidden and observe. We need to gather as much intel as we can before making our move." As the minutes stretched into hours, the tension mounted with each passing second. The forest seemed to be holding its breath as if in anticipation of the inevitable. Then, A sudden noise shattered the stillness, a low twig snap that sent Ryan into a cold sweat. "Did anybody else hear that?" Private Hayes asked, his voice trembling. "Negative," I replied, my grip tightening on the rifle. "Stay focused. We're not alone out here." I paused briefly while recounting the stark beginning to the mission Blackhawk, but it was enough to get the man's attention. The look he gave me alone struck fear into my soul. "Continue," he said in a deep, raspy voice. I still remember the taste of damp air. It reminded me of the calm before the storm. Then it happened. Gunfire echoed through the night as unseen assailants ambushed us from all sides. We were prepared for this and shot each body down one by one until only lifeless bodies on the ground remained. Amidst the chaos, Private Hayes found himself separated from the group, his heart pounding in his chest as he darted into the darkness of Appalachia. "Sir, I'm being chased by 3 to 4 hooded attackers requesting immediate backup," Hayes shouted into his radio, his voice laced with panic. "We're on our way, Hayes. Hold tight," I responded, my voice strained with urgency. As gunfire ceased, I noticed Hayes' labored breathing through the radio. His next words caught us off guard. "I'm navigating through a maze of dilapidated buildings. It seems I've lost them." A sense of foreboding washed over all of us. "The air's getting thick, and there's a stench unlike anything I've ever smelled. I see strange symbols covering the walls, Captain. I'm scared," Hayes said, his quivering voice barely audible over the crackling of the radio. As we continued to follow Hayes' tracker, we had also started to catch a slight scent of decay. He had caught it earlier, but this was to be expected, I thought. A few minutes later, and nothing from Hayes, we had decided to enter the maze of collapsed and crumbling buildings. A flare burned dimly near a building, so we decided to leave the other 2 men to stand watch outside while we went inside. "Take a look at this," I said, pointing to the runic symbols that covered every surface. We surveyed the area with caution, only for the other 2 with us to start arguing. "There's more of those Magic the Gathering-looking symbols," Apollo said. "Nah, definitely belongs to Dungeons and Dragons," Nexus argued. At this point, I was just wanting to get back home, but we had a job to do, and by the time I looked back after my train of thought, I found them wrestling each other on the ground over by the runes that we had come to look at. "Would you 2 fuckwits get off each other and shut up? We have to find Hayes and finish the mission," I half yelled, as not to give our position away, but enough for them to hear me clearly. "Who are you talking to?" Lisa asked. "The 2 idiots attracting unwanted attention," I snapped. "Marcus, they're out front, where you wanted them." My blood ran cold as I suddenly came back to it. I ordered Nexus and Apollo to stand watch outside the building complex while we went inside to look for Hayes. The radio suddenly crackled to life. "I found a back entrance to the building since it's starting to rain out here. I can barely hear you over the static." Hayes' voice chirped through the radio. "Permission to enter, sir?" Hayes asked, his voice trembling. "Granted. Enter cautiously and keep your eyes peeled. This is now a retrieval and extraction," I replied, my voice a lifeline in the dark. "I'm walking up to the building's back entrance now when I see something. Wait, it looks like hooded figures up ahead." His voice cut out mid-sentence as he presumably entered the building. "Shit," I said aloud and started jogging in the direction of the back entrance, hoping to get to a possibly hurt Hayes along with Lisa following me in pursuit. "Stay calm, Ryan. We're coming to get you," I replied, my voice strained with determination. As our reconnaissance team Delta rapidly approached the flare's back exit, we noticed a slight electricity in the air as our hair stood on end. When we first stepped foot into the building's back entrance, it was almost as if we had been put straight into a humid freezer, the kind you'd find at Uncle Mickey's house, and boy, it was freezing. The second thing we noticed was Hayes' rifle, empty. This made no sense, as we'd heard 0 gunfire moments before. Me and Lisa were confused, but we had to move and make the extraction successful. "Apollo, Nexus, report in," I said over the radio, but I got nothing but a buzzing, crackling sound in return. "Signal must be weak," I muttered. Me and Lisa traversed the building's interior, our steel-toe boots hitting the wet floor. There was a tension in the air, and I knew why. Lisa doubted my ability to lead us. I swear I caught her eyeing me a few times. As we continued our imperial march down the hallway, we had encountered the dog tags of our boy Hayes. Not a good sign in all this. "Hayes, come in. Are you injured?" Nothing. Just static. But a slight slur came out of the radio, like someone trying to speak for the first time. "Hayes, Nexus, Apollo, is that you? Come in." To our horror, the room we ended up walking into while distracted by the radio was, there's no good way to put it. It was filled with bones of all sizes. Some ranged from carrot size, while some ranged from the size of an oversized frying pan. "Holy crap," Lisa muttered under her breath. This wasn't on any of the intel we had. She was right. Nothing could have prepared us for this. The radio crackled to life. "Turn around!" We immediately swung around towards the door, and I'm not sure how, nor do I really care, but there was Apollo. I looked at Lisa, and she shot me a look of approval. She saw him, too. "I told you to stay outside," I said. "Sorry, our position was compromised, and we had to get the hell out of there," he explained. Where is your great dungeon master buddy Nexus?" I asked, with a touch of annoyance. "I don't know. We ran in two different directions," he said. They could have got him for all I know." That was when I noticed it. It was slight, and any average person would have missed it. His eyes. I was shining my flashlight straight in his face, yet I saw no reflection in his eyes. First I chalked it up to delusion, but the more I examined his physical appearance, the more irregularities I saw. His hair was slightly darker, his skin paler than usual. He seemed taller at one point. The teeth, when he showed a grateful grin, looked irregularly sharp, almost dagger-like. It appeared that Lisa hadn't seen what I was seeing, because she gave him a firm handshake as they set off to find Hayes and Nexus. He also had a tinge of blood smeared on the toe of his steel-toed boot. As they left the room, I trailed behind, making sure to keep an eye on Apollo. "Hello," a familiar voice said over the radio. Ryan sounded off. I didn't know how to describe it. He prolonged every word he said as if he were unsure that was the word he wanted to use. "Ryan, is that you?" I asked. "Yes," he responded. "Tell us where you are. We need landmarkers." "Go past," he said. "Can you repeat that?" I asked, but there was silence. It was as if he were choosing his next words very carefully. "Ryan, we need you to be more specific on your coordinates," I ordered in a stern, monotone voice. When he didn't respond, I ordered Lisa and Apollo to follow me deeper into the building that we had entered. I was trying to rationalize it by telling myself Hayes was probably slurring his speech due to the fact it was super cold and he could have hypothermia. Is it just me, or is it getting colder the further we go into this crumbling building? Lisa said, to no one in particular. "Can I get a minute to collect myself?" I said to the old agents that were collecting my memories like bees on a flower. They nodded and took a sip of water as they sat on the metal table in the room we lingered in. After half a minute, I continued my account. We had rounded the corner, and we saw a figure just standing there in a dark hallway. It nerved the hell out of me, since it stood like a statue and as quiet as an asylum chamber. By the look of it, the figure had a uniform the same as the one we were wearing, which seemed odd. "Is that you, Hayes?" I called out towards the unmoving figure. It didn't respond, didn't move an inch to the sound of my command. Just as a precaution, I ordered the others to check their ammunition and point it forward just in case it got messy. And just then I noticed Apollo didn't have his rifle, which greatly confused me. "Apollo, where's your rifle?" I ordered. "I lost it in the scramble me and Nexus had earlier when the terrorists ambushed us, whilst waiting outside as you ordered us to," he replied, looking pale as he probably recounted it in his head. I gave him an angry stare, but shot my gaze back at the still unmoving figure. I held my hand up to tell Lisa and Apollo to stay put as I slowly closed the distance between me and it. As I came within a few feet of it, I poked the figure in the back with the tip of my rifle. It promptly fell over with a deafening, dull thud. "Holy Jesus on a skateboard," I half yelled when I realized it was Nexus's uniform with his dog tags around the mannequin's neck. It was a mannequin, which scared the shit out of me and the others. How in the hell did this uniform and all get on a mannequin that just so happened to perfectly fit its clothes? This shit show was already making no sense, but now I felt like this was a low-budget nightmare. "They must have got him and done this as a sick joke to toy with us," Apollo said in a shaky voice. "We don't know that, but it is indeed a grim possibility. We gotta remain on point and hope for the best, even though this job is never always about happy endings," I told them, sadness in my tone. We started checking and sweeping every room we came across, only to find nothing but dust and static on the radio, until we either heard a response on the radio or we came across any of our lost teammates. About 12 rooms down the hallway, we found a door slightly ajar, which we found all the others shut tight. I halted the unit and made a hand signal to proceed with guns drawn into the room. 3, 2, 1, I counted down quietly. When I hit 0, we entered the room with a slight pace in our stealthy entrance. To this very day, I wish we had left that room alone, but we had a job to do. What we found was Nexus. Well, what was left of him. You could barely call it a human. The mangled remains of Nexus lay sprawled amidst the surrounding rubble, an art piece of carnage. His form resembled a pulpy chaos, with flesh torn into ribbons and organs strewn about as though crafted by a butcher catering exclusively to Bundy and Dahmer themselves. Limbs were twisted at an unnatural angle, bones protruding through torn skin like jagged spears. Chunks of flesh had been ripped away, leaving gaping wounds that oozed crimson onto the ruined floor. His face contorted in betrayal, he was barely recognizable beneath the mass of ripped tendons and muscles. Eyes stared listlessly, wide with terror, while lips peeled back in a silent scream, revealing broken teeth protruding from the back of his throat and neck, as well as partially, and having his own tongue bitten off, hanging out of his mouth like a dog with its head out a car window. A rusty piece of rebar was protruding from the back of his head and out through where his left eye should have been. It was a scene of unimaginable horror, a testament to the merciless brutality of whoever had done this to Lieutenant Gabriel Nexus, and as we stood amidst the carnage, the realization dawned upon us that, in the darkness of the crumbling labyrinth, something merciless lurked. Its bloodlust insatiable, and its thirst for harm unquenchable. "We need to get the hell out of here," I said out loud. Apollo and I shared the same unspoken thought, a lingering question that danced on the edge of our minds, until Lisa voiced it out loud, cutting through the tension. "Do we radio home base and request the dreadnoughts? Even if we do, which we should, I doubt they'd send them. It's not disastrous enough for them to intervene. Plus, those guys out there are just muscle. They'll shred everything they see," I replied, my confidence tinged with uncertainty. "It's worth a shot. Otherwise, we can always just bail in the armored truck we arrived in," Apollo said. "We'll be toast if we bail, whether or not the base agrees," I countered, my voice edged with a sneer. I thought over our options, and it became clear that there were no good choices. Stay and risk further danger, or call for the extraction and face potential consequences. Calling in the dreadnoughts wasn't viable either, as they were essentially a last resort. "Unit Delta to base, do you copy?" I asked sternly into the receiver. "Base to Delta, copy. What's the situation?" the man on the other end asked with curiosity and professionalism. "Delta unit to base, we've got a KIA and an MIA. Multiple hostages surrounding the compound. Request immediate backup," I conveyed, a hint of panic evident. When the base hadn't responded right away, worry gnawed at my mind. Had we lost connection? "Base to Delta unit, backup denied due to current situation. Be advised, we are detecting multiple signatures around the area you are located in." "Delta unit to base, roger that. We'll be on site until the threat is neutralized," I confirmed before signing off. With no backup en route, we were left to fend for ourselves. As I straightened my back, I saw Hayes limping towards us, his condition shockingly worse than I imagined. His skin drooped in some areas and stretched thin in others, a grim sight that made my skin crawl. "Hayes, is that you? Where have you been?" I asked, a mix of relief and anger in my voice. Hayes barely acknowledged my presence. His demeanor was unsettling, but before I could dwell on it, I spotted a few flashlights in the distance, coming from the group of 3 people patrolling the area. I thought to myself that I'd have to grill his brains out later when we got back to base, if we finished this mission alive. I was about to brief the team on our next move when I realized that Hayes was missing again. Alarm bells rang in my mind. Hadn't I just seen him a moment ago? "Did anyone notice Hayes?" I asked, a chill creeping up my spine. "Yeah, he said something about scouting a vantage point down the hill," Apollo replied. "Check on him. Make sure he's okay," I ordered, my unease growing. "That directive will haunt me forever, Agent..." "Wait, you never told me your first name," I said, addressing the agent from the FBI, ATF, or whatever damn organization he was from. "I suspect you're delaying what you must disclose, eager to return to your solitary abode and share this tale with your online acquaintances. But should you do so, I have no choice but to imprison you for violating the NDAs I'll provide once the story concludes. So refrain from inquiries and proceed," the seasoned individual growled, his voice resonating with the weight of years and authority, leaving me shaken to my core. "Apologies," I murmured. Apollo had ventured off to check up on Hayes, and I noticed a few figures tentatively crouching alongside the building, just a floor below us. Those terrorists were going to try to get the jump on our unit if we stepped a foot outside the building we were located in. "Guys have spotted 4 armed figures crouched on the east wall just a floor down from the window," I said into the radio. I saw Apollo barrel through the open doorway and nearly crash through a closed door before he could stop himself. He looked white as a ghost and out of breath, like he had just run a full marathon. "Hey, watch what you're doing, Apollo," barked Lisa, as she had a near miss with Apollo colliding into her. "Captain, I found Hayes," he said, shakily, though his tone was barely audible. "Is he all right?" His body's gone." "What are you talking about, Apollo? He's right over there," I demanded. "His body is gone. Only his skin's there," Apollo said, his knees buckling and shaking under his weight. I hadn't realized at the time. It took me a few seconds to process what he had said. When I figured out what he meant, I bolted towards the hallway and found the room where Hayes went to find a good vantage point. When I finally found the room, I goggled at the sight in horror. Before us lay Private Hayes, or what remained of him, a ghastly mass of shredded skin draped over the cold earth. His skin, once a canvas of life, now hung in tattered shreds, a macabre tapestry stretched over a devoid room. With only his skin remaining, the flesh was shredded strips like a shedded snakeskin. Before the shredded remains, there was nothing but emptiness, a void where muscle and sinew once pulled with vitality. Now emptied by, well, nothing. Blood, thick and viscous, seeped from the shredded remains, mingling with the barely scented room in a sickening display. His face, a face of surprise and pain, bore the brunt of humanity's fury. Eyes, wide with horror, stared sightlessly into the abyss, their once vibrant hue now dulled by the chill embrace of death. Lips, torn and mangled, were frozen in a silent frown, a testament to the unspeakable damage that he had endured. Amidst all the desolation, one thing was clear. Private Hayes was beyond salvation. Apollo appeared behind me suddenly with a surprisingly calm expression. What I hadn't noticed before was that the hunting knife situated on his waistband was missing when I saw it a few minutes later. "Apollo, where's your knife?" I asked with concern. "Probably lost it in the ambush earlier," he said nervously. "You better be right about that. Don't lose weapons the terrorists can use against us." At this point, Lisa tried to look around the doorway, but we had subdued her efforts and forced her away from the room. We needed to radio base so we could leave, with or without their permission. I didn't care if I got my head booted in by my boss or not. When I came back into the room, though, I noticed tossed furniture and bloodstains leading towards the closet door. "Apollo, watch my back," I told him. I crept to the closet door, and the smell got stronger with each step. It was heavy with copper and the slight hint of decay. I stood at the door, and in one swift motion I swung open the creaky old thing, and I found the rest of Hayes inside. That's when I noticed it, a detail that turned my blood from ice to boiling hot rage. The knife protruding from his sternum, a knife with Apollo's bloodied initials on the handle. Next thing I knew, my temper exploded like Krakatoa, erupting after 1,000 years of rage. "You son of a bitch!" I screamed at him, not caring who could hear me. Before he could rifle his gun at me, I pulled my service pistol out of my holster and fired a shot that ripped through his shoulder. He managed to pull a shot off at me too, but the bullet only grazed my thigh. His agonizing yells and moans of pain echoed throughout the building, Lisa bursting into the room where I shot him, with the remains of Hayes' skin and innards still strewn around. "Marcus, put your gun down. What are you doing?" she demanded. "He killed Hayes. I saw what was left of him in that closet. Apollo's knife still in him." I thought I might be losing my mind, but the thought was pushed aside when Lisa confirmed what I saw only a few minutes ago. She looked down at the now profusely bleeding Apollo and gave him a look I could only describe as pure hate. Before I could tell her to handcuff him and not cause any more damage, she grabbed her sidearm and put one right between his eyes. "Jesus Christ, Alvarez, what did you do that for?" She didn't answer. "Let's get out of here. I just need to radio base on our next move," I said aloud. "Unit Delta to base, come in." But there was nothing but static. I guess the concrete building was blocking the radio signal, so we'd have to leave on our own accord. I peeked out the window and didn't see any hostiles around, or approaching our current location. Perhaps they'd left the compound in fear of more officers being called down to take the rest of them. "Let's just get out of here and back to base. I just can't stand seeing any more death tonight," Lisa told me, with desperation in her voice. We trudged down the stairs and peeked out the front entrance to find the corpses of the terrorists we had shot down. We proceeded with rifles drawn, along with swiftness that was questionable, considering that stealth would have been a good-sized priority right now. When we were about 100 yards away from the armored truck, Lisa tripped on a root that stuck out of the ground. She stumbled and fell at an awkward angle, cracking her head on one of the large rocks that dotted the area. "Shit, Lisa, are you all right?" She didn't respond, and I assumed she was either unconscious or dead from her untimely fall. Ultimately, I had to carry her 100 or so yards to the truck. When I put her in the back, I hopped into the driver's seat and noticed the keys were still in the ignition. My dumbass had left them there, and I was lucky that nobody had decided to steal our escape route. I turned the ignition, and the vehicle rumbled with steady intensity, ready to take us far, far away. "So that's my story, my adults-only fairy tale you wanted out of me, Agent." I spoke to him in an overall tired tone. "And how is Lisa holding up these days?" "She's brain dead, since the blow to her head gave her major brain damage. She'll never remember this mission, and she'll need to live in an assisted living home until the end of her days." In the end, the agent made me sign a bunch of NDAs and sent me on my way. That's my story, and I'd place some bets that the agents will be pretty pissed when they figure out that I recorded our entire conversation on my old 90s tape recorder. I'll leave you with some advice, though. Humanity will always be the apex predator to what it can conjure up against you. At least you can hide under the covers from the monsters under your bed, but when you're faced with someone with true horrific intent, all you can do is watch the fight unfold.